I am joined today by the lovely Aubri Lancaster, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I've been really looking forward to hearing your insight and getting to share that with our audience. So let me tell y'all who Aubri is so that you can also be as excited as I am. So Aubri Lancaster is an independent, asex, and anti-up certified sexuality educator, conducting workshops and trainings for clinicians and sexuality professionals on asexuality and aromanticism. Aubri has presented for numerous organizations, including the American Psychiatric Association, the GLMA Annual Conference on LGBTQ plus health, and Planned Parenthood of Southwest Oregon, amongst others. As a gray romantic asexual person, Aubri has lived experience and a connection to the asexual and aromantic communities that provides a unique perspective on the issues facing the changing landscape of sexuality and orientation today. You can find out more about Aubri at www.asexeducation.com or on Instagram at asexeducation. And I'll make sure that those links are in the notes as well. Please welcome Aubri Lancaster. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yes, me too. And I wanted to have this conversation because part of my goal with the show From the Heartside Out is to spotlight all types of relationships and connections. And I think when it comes to topics like asexuality or aromanticism, there are so many misconceptions, misunderstandings. I feel like the spectrum of asexuality is either ignored, left out of the conversations, or misrepresented in the conversations. And so I wanted to have someone on who could shed a little more light, give us a chance to really get to know more about asexuality and aromanticism. And especially, this is February and people are thinking about love and relationships. I wanted to expand the conversation of love and talking about platonic love and all these other sorts of ways that folks can experience love and connection. So thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your experiences and share your expertise.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything, I know I read your bio, but is there anything that you would like to add as an introduction to yourself or anything that feels helpful or important for you to share with folks about yourself?
I found out about the language of asexuality later in life for myself. I was 39 when I finally came to this language after spending most of my career in the adult sexuality education field. And I think it's important to recognize just how much of a difference it makes to have language around our experiences.
Yes. It can make a world of difference just to know, like there is language for this. And this is something that other folks are talking about or having questions about. Speaking of your experience, you identify as a gray romantic asexual person. Can you explain what that means to folks who may not be as familiar with that language?
Yeah. So I'll start with asexual, which is the one people are generally a little more familiar with. And if you want kind of a canned definition, the most common definition people use is that asexuality is a sexual orientation where the person experiences little to no sexual attraction towards other people. The concept around desire for sex gets a little muddled in this. That's where we move into more gray areas, but there really is no space for people who just don't want sex, regardless of orientation. So the asexual community is also kind of an umbrella space for those from that positionality. But when we talk about it as an orientation, we're really focused more on the concept of sexual attraction and the attraction element, the directional element.
Mm-hmm.
And then the aromanticism is people who experience little to no romantic attraction. It's a romantic orientation. And that's a little harder for a lot of people to kind of grasp because for a lot of people, sexual and romantic attraction are innately intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
But for asexual and aromantic people, they may be very different, or they may be innately intertwined in a way that the person isn't really experiencing either, or only under certain circumstances, which is where the gray part of the umbrella comes in. For me, it's only under certain circumstances for romantic attraction. I experienced it fairly frequently when I was younger and when I met my spouse 15, 16 years ago. was the last time I experienced romantic attraction. And kind of the normative expectation is, well, that's how it goes, right? You meet someone, you fall in love, you get married, and then that's the person you're romantically attracted to for the rest of your life. And yet we also know affairs happen all the time. People experience romantic attraction to people around them, regardless of their relationship status. So the fact that since I met my spouse, all of my relationships have come through a very platonic lens gives me more of a sense of being within that aromantic spectrum because of how most of my relationships are formed. I don't get crushes at all outside of, the relationship that I'm in.
Yeah, and thank you for distinguishing or being clear that you're one speaking about your personal experience right now, and that other folks may define things a little differently, or it may present or show up a little differently in their life, and that's fine. This is your experience, your perspective. You were saying that there's a difference between attraction and desire. So sexual attraction and sexual desire, for example. Can you share a little bit more about that distinction?
Yeah. So attraction is that interpersonal directional element being drawn towards another person. And attraction can come in many different forms. We talk about sexual and romantic attraction, but there's also aesthetic attraction, being drawn towards another person's body attire or how they decorate themselves, their comportment, how they hold themselves, as Tracy Gilbert would say. There's a lot of different ways that we relate to how we are drawn towards another person. There's also intellectual attraction, feeling drawn to kind of geek out over something or share your special interest. Emotional attraction, feeling drawn to share your feelings with somebody. So, when it comes to desire, as Emily Nagoski would say, desire is the wanting to engage in the activities of whatever type you are desiring. So when it comes to sexual attraction would be feeling sexually drawn to another person, having sexual feelings for another person, finding them sexually appealing or hot, may or may not involve an arousal response. It may or may not involve intrusive thoughts and fantasies of sexual activity. It may just be finding the person sexually appealing and thinking, you know what, under the right circumstances, I would be very interested in having sex with that person. Whereas the desire is actually wanting to engage in sexual activity in a sexual context. So sexual desire, wanting sexual activity, which can absolutely be self-contained and solo.
Mm-hmm. That is a thank you.
So,
That's an important distinction. That it doesn't have to mean that this is a partnered experience or needs to be a partner experience to be valid or real. I appreciate that. How would you say your sexual orientation or your relationship orientation impact your approach to relationships, love, intimacy, those sort? I know you were sharing just a moment ago, since meeting your partner, all the other connections or relationships you formed have been from a platonic lens. How does how you identify factor into how you approach relationships, love, intimacy in a broad sense?
yeah. I've always felt very free to have friendships with whomever I felt drawn to be friends with, and I never really understood the social stigma around cross-gender friendships when we speak within a binary gendered model.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always had friends of all genders, and I've had partners in the past that seemed very threatened by that, and I never really understood it. And my current partner has never felt threatened by that, also has many friends of various genders. So I think in some ways, that compatibility made it even harder for me to recognize that how we were experiencing things might not be how other people were experiencing things. But I have a four-way best friendship from college. We've been this group friendship for 27 years now. And over the years, we've had partners that didn't understand why we refused to deprioritize our relationship with each other in favor of those romantic partners. And that has had a huge impact on my lens. And even from a young age, the idea of having a best friend where you only had one best friend and that was supposed to be, you're supposed to rank your friendship
Mm-hmm.
and finding different people that I really connected with and felt that kind of best friend type bond with them. And then having to add labels like, well, this is my high school best friend. This is my college best friend. This is my childhood best friend. This is, like
Mm-hmm.
trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how do I communicate that relationship? What kinds of relationships have you had that, like in that kind of context?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I am someone who has always had kind of cross gender friendships as well. One, I was the only girl in my family until I was 14, and so a lot
Mm,
of times my brother's friends would become my friends as well, and it just made sense to me. I'm like, we enjoy the same things. We're all playing outside together. Yeah, it just makes sense, and that kind of continued even as I've gotten older. Two of my very close friends are guys, and I'm just like, I can't imagine like life without their friendship, and also have come to feel very thankful and fortunate that it's not something my spouse has ever felt threatened by, because I know that it does become a thing. And I think it works because his two closest friends, well, two of his closest friends are women, and I'm like, you've known them way longer than you've known me. It didn't make sense to me to expect those relationships to be less important because our relationship is now also important.
And did you ever have people that kind of push back against that or questioned those relationships?
Yeah, at times, not very often, honestly, but at times, I think the general assumption does tend to be that, oh, men and women can't be friends, or that this is risky in some way. It was never anything I paid a whole lot of attention to, because I'm like, I know my friendships, I know my connections
Mm,
better than anyone else does. But it makes sense, as you're saying, like that expectation sometimes to prioritize or rank or enforce some sort of hierarchy on your relationships, as opposed to, I was thinking as you were sharing, it sounds like such a freeing way to think about relationships and love and connections, that there doesn't have to be a hierarchy here, that these
mhm.
people can be meaningful to you in their own way without it being who's more or less meaningful.
Yes, yes. You
Mm.
can look at the individual relationships and your relationship with them and the closeness that you feel with that person. And you can have language for that closeness
Yeah.
without, like we talk about acquaintances,
Hmm.
coworkers, close friends.
Hmm.
There's even language around passionate friendship,
Hmm.
the people that you want to cuddle with and
Yeah.
you just, you have a lot of the passionate engagement with that is non-sexual. Intimate friends, people that know the intimate details of your life that you can be vulnerable and open with. And
Mhm.
we can talk about how close we are within a relationship without having to compare it to other relationships.
Right, right. Yeah. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you kind of making that distinction. And it also makes me think that, I know that in some of your work or even in conversations, you specify, when we're talking about platonic love as opposed to romantic love. Uh, why does that feel important to you to specify that it is platonic and it is love? Or is that because you see differences in how love is treated or talked about, whether it's depending on whether it's romantic or platonic?
Yeah, the word love itself is such an insufficient word. We are
I agree.
speaking, right? We're speaking in a language that has its own specificity around language. And there's 6,500 languages around the world, and
Mhm.
many of them have a much wider variety of words to talk about different kinds of love. But within English, we have to use modifiers: familial love, platonic love, romantic love, these ways that we can speak the same language and yet try and figure out how to place that language within this broader spectrum. And it becomes community terminology. And when I say that, I mean, it's what does it mean to you? So when I say platonic love and you say platonic love, We're coming from different contexts, different life
Right.
experiences, different ways we relate to this language, this insufficient language to describe what we think of as that. And yet love, is it a feeling? Is it an action, as Bell Hooks might talk about it? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what even is love? So there's so much more expansiveness that tries to get forced into this tiny 4-letter word.
Mm-hmm.
So, the concept of platonic love is often spoken of in, love between friends,
Mm-hmm.
love that isn't connected necessarily to sexual or romantic, although you can still kind of play with that too. Think of friends with benefits
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
other ways we connect to each other. Romantic love, similarly, are we talking about the kind of relationship the person wants to have? Are we talking about the innate feeling of limerence, that intense highs and euphoria of falling in love that is in all of the movies and the music? Half the songs on the radio are about this euphoric kind of love.
Mm.
And yet, for some people, that's not what romantic love means. For them, it might be just feeling drawn to have a companionate long-term relationship with somebody,
Hmm.
which can be very muddled with the concept of platonic love. You got to lean in and ask, what does it mean for you?
What does it mean for you? Yeah, because it isn't going to mean the same thing or look the same to everyone. Yeah, and you mentioned limerence. I wanted to talk more about that as well. And can you share a little bit more about, I guess, how you would define limerence, what makes it similar or different from other related kind of words or terms, whether that's like love, lust, infatuation, any of those sorts of things?
Yeah, the term limerence is super fun because it was invented by Dr. Dorothy Tennov for her work in the 70s. And she wanted to have a word that could talk about romantic love and romantic attraction in a very specific way without stepping on the toes of people that use that language in different ways. She
Okay.
wanted a term to describe the very specific state of heightened sensitivity and euphoria when you think the person loves you back, intense heartache if you think they might not, coupled with intrusive thoughts where you just can't get the person out of your head. All roads lead back to thinking about them. Their good
Mm.
qualities are magnified and bad qualities are minimized, excused, and ignored. And limerence, the mechanism of limerence is hope and uncertainty. The goal of limerence is hope for reciprocation of feelings at a similar level of intensity, and then that uncertainty as to whether or not it exists. And that's what fuels the building of limerence. And you can see this in any love story in the media and Disney fantasies, like whatever
Mm-hmm.
it might be that talks about this very specific state of euphoric love. And for people who have never experienced it, it just looks like a Hollywood fantasy. For some people who have experienced it and had horrible things in their life happen because of it, maybe they had an affair because of it, maybe they were heartbroken because it wasn't reciprocated, it can be incredibly painful. And a lot of the work on limerence since Tennov's work has focused on the negative consequences of unrequited love or uh, limerence that causes negative impact in your life, and not as much on limerence that leads to happily ever after
Yeah.
or people that don't experience limerence. But part of why I love Tenov's work is from day one of writing her book, she knew people didn't experience this. Part of her inspiration for writing this book was meeting somebody who had never experienced limerence and recognizing that there are people that just don't experience this. What does it look like to people who don't experience it? And we didn't have the language of aromanticism at that point. But
Right.
while not all aromantic people may relate to limerence as what they're not experiencing, a
Mm-hmm.
good portion will, because when we're talking about not experiencing romantic attraction, for some people, it is that euphoria and obsession and intense need to have that love reciprocated.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't think about it. It makes sense that this is not something that everyone in the whole entire world would necessarily experience. But I didn't think about that as it may or may not be linked to aromanticism. So would you say, so we know it's not a required life experience, right? We know that limerence is not necessarily required for living a happy and satisfying life. Is it, maybe I'm answering my own question, is it necessary to experience that limerence before being in a relationship? Or are there folks who are like, no, I'm absolutely happy and satisfied and fulfilled in this relationship, but I don't know that I ever experienced this limerence period?
So limerence generally only lasts for a little while because once there is nothing to hope for, you have it. You have consummated that, you have proof positive the person loves you back. And there is no uncertainty because you have some form of commitment. Then limerence starts to fade, and it either fades into a sobering effect where the person realizes, oh my God, this is not the right person for me. And if they're already married, now they have to untangle that or try and make it work. Or it fades into companionate love. And for some people, that's where they are going the whole time. So think about falling in love versus growing into love. It's just a different way to enter into the same place. Now, some people who don't experience limerence may not find long-term companionate love healing in a coupled romantic context. Again, romance in that sense might be more the performative aspects of the relationship escalator, the dating and the gifts and, the things that we do in pursuit of romantic connection. So they might prefer a platonic life companion, which is very much erased in our society as a potential, especially within our legal system. If you're going to marry somebody and not consummate the relationship, are you even legally married in some places?
Right.
Similarly, if you just have a best friend that's your life partner and you need to be there for them when they're having a medical issue, there are no protections for you to get leave to do that. So
because you're not considered family or immediate family in these very narrowly defined ways.
The book, Other Significant Others, last name Cohen on the book. I forgot her first name, but really great book on actually seeing what that can look like to have people who are not your romantic partner being significant partners within your life. And then alternatively, some people are single at heart, as Bella DePaulo would say. Being single is their preferred relationship model.
So is limerence something that you can, I guess, choose, or I guess I'm thinking of it the way I'm hearing it, or the way I'm kind of understanding it is that you don't necessarily choose, like, I'm going to be in limerence now with this person, that it more so kind of happens and you can go with it or maybe try to resist it. I don't know if you can really resist it, but it doesn't sound like it's something that you can necessarily avoid.
It is an involuntary state.
Okay.
But I think there are, to some degree, like when you are aware of involuntary responses, you can also be more aware of the things that increase that experience or help you avoid that experience.
Okay.
So, like if you know that you are starting to feel limerent towards somebody, but you're in a relationship that's monogamous and you're not looking for another coupling, you may need to limit your contact with that person that you're feeling limerent towards, which can be hard when everything in your body is saying, I need to be with this person all the time.
Yeah.
So we can choose how to act, but the actual internal physical experience may not be necessarily within our control. But just like with sexual attraction and sexual desire, we can choose not to act on it, even if our body is screaming for us to do something.
Right. Okay. That makes sense, because I think of it like, as you explain it that way, breathing is involuntary, but I can hold my breath. I can breathe faster or slower or more shallow or more deep, but the experience itself is the part that I only have so much control over how I do this. So you can control what you do in a state of limerence, but maybe not necessarily just completely choose to shut yourself off to that experience altogether.
Right. And you need to be aware that you're in it, because otherwise it just feels magical. It feels like it is a godsend. All of the language we have around romantic love in our society positions it as this ultimate otherworldly thing that we must honor and follow. So if you fall in love with somebody while you're in another relationship, not only does limerence draw you towards that new person, but society is saying, well, there's only one person out there for you. And if you're feeling these feelings for this new person, maybe that's because they're the one. That's the social narrative that makes it harder to have an awareness to go, nope, this is just limerence. It's just a thing going on inside my body and my brain. And here are the steps that I can take to decrease its hold on me.
So how do you know? How do you determine, okay, is this someone that I actually do want to be in relationship with, or is this just limerence? And once we get in a relationship, I'm going to have an awakening and realize I made a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
No easy answer, right?
No easy answer. No. Just, again, comparing to sexual attraction, what do you do if you're feeling sexual feelings towards somebody that you shouldn't be feeling sexual feelings towards? How do you handle that? Some people handle it very well and some people really don't. And the support systems we have in society make a big difference in that. Like, you can't tell a person in limerence that person's bad for you, because that's going to fuel limerence. That increases uncertainty, and that fuels limerence. So I don't have a good answer for how do you stop limerence, but I can say that if a person is aware that it's a thing, the more we learn about the language of limerence and the mechanics of limerence and the stages of limerence, because it starts out with, this little glimmer, this awareness that this person might be a potential romantic interest, the first little butterflies in the stomach, and then some form of attraction drawing you towards them. And then eventually it moves through the state of crystallization, which the analogy came from a poet Tennov in the 1800s that Tennov references, where if you think about putting a stick into a salt mine, over time, the salt crystallizes around the stick and the stick becomes this beautiful object. That is the limerent process of kind of crystallizing your view of this person as this idealized, amazing person, and you're ignoring the fact that there's a stick under it. And you can't tell somebody, honey, that's just a stick. Like, okay, yeah, but it's beautiful.
And it's beautiful and sparkly.
And so, I don't have any good answers for how to break the spell. Again, many rom-com or romance novel, like all of our media and music and all of these things are about this incomprehensible experience.
Yeah, we're still learning.
Yeah, we're still learning about, and everything in our life affects how this will show up for us. And for those that don't experience it, it's like this constant onslaught of being told this is the most beautiful thing you'll ever experience, but then you don't experience it. Right. And being told you need this in your life, but you don't have it. And then when you do, for those who do experience limerence, they're also often told, well, that's not real love.
Not real. So it's like, how do you win?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's complicated. We have a lot more language around sexuality and desire these days than we do the mechanics of romance, because it gets lumped in together in a lot of ways. And there is just not enough awareness of the actual biological components and innate experiences that do have consistent mechanics around them.
That's why I have so much admiration and respect for the folks who are doing the work, who are doing the research, who are studying these things, because these are experiences that people are having every single day. And I think it's so powerful, like you were saying before, to have language to identify or explain or describe people's experiences is so powerful. So to all of you researchers out there, thank you, thank you, thank you. Your work absolutely matters and makes a difference. Yes, and as we're learning more and as we're broadening our understanding, I did want to talk a little bit more about asexuality and aromanticism in particular, because like I said before, I feel like those identities are either left out of the conversation or they're misrepresented in a lot of conversations. And so I do not expect you, it would never ask you to speak for the entire ACE community. However, I do think that you have a lot of insight and wisdom to offer and to clear up some, whether it's misinformation or just a lack of information. And so a question I have been asked in my work or have heard other folks asking or wondering, do asexual people have sex? I've heard people say like, well, obviously if you're asexual, you don't have sex because you're not interested in sex, and that is just you claiming and deciding that you were never going to be sexually active for the rest of your life.
So one of my favorite ways to talk about this is to point out that orientation influences behavior, but behavior does not define orientation.
Good.
Sexual attraction is a mechanism of arousal, but it's not the only mechanism of arousal. So some people who do not experience sexual attraction don't have any interest in sexual activity with another person or even with themselves. Some people, they do want sexual activity, but primarily with themselves. And some people have other motivations to have interpersonal sexual activity, and there are other ways to access arousal other than sexual attraction. So asexual people kind of run this gamut, and it's kind of a very common point of contention within the community and in outside narratives as to what behavior means in the context of identity.
Yeah, and that is, I feel like that's been an ongoing conversation in terms of identity and orientation in general. Like, how does behavior fit in? But I love what you said, that it doesn't have to, that orientation doesn't have to be defined by behavior. There can be some connection or relationship, but it may not be as clear cut this or that as it's often made to seem. So I think that means, yeah. So I think that means I know the answer to this next question, but I'll ask it anyway. So do asexual or aromantic people have relationships?
So back to what we were talking about with how inadequate the word love is. The word relationship is just as inadequate, and we have to place modifiers on it. So sexual relationship, romantic relationship, platonic relationship, familial relationship. There are many, many different kinds of relationships, including relationship with self. So while somebody may be less inclined towards a sexual relationship with another person, if they are asexual, some asexual people are very much interested in sexual relationships. Some asexual people are alloromantic, so they do experience romantic attraction and may be very much drawn toward romantic relationships that may or may not involve sexual activity. Some people are aromantic and allosexual, so they are drawn towards sexual relationships that may or may not involve romantic relationship activities, like, again, kind of talking about the relationship escalator, or maybe they're more interested in friends with benefits or play partners, stuff that often gets very heavily stigmatized in our society. So I think there's a lot more people that might fall on the romantic spectrum than are aware of it, simply because, if nothing else, we're also told that narrative that there's only one person out there. So if you have never experienced romantic attraction or romantic love, the narrative is, oh, well, you just haven't met the right person yet. Oh, don't give up on love. Just keep trying. You'll find them eventually. Rather than, how can I be happy the way I am? How can I find relationships that affirm the feelings that I do have? What is actually a thriving and happy life for me without this constant push towards a feeling that I've never felt or have no interest in feeling? Where do we go from there?
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. And even in our conversations, with getting this conversation scheduled and set up, you shared something with me that I found very helpful, that some of the ways that I had phrased some topics or questions that we might talk about, you let me know, hey, I'm gonna rephrase this or reframe this to keep the spirit of what you're getting at or what you're asking. But you said it so beautifully that asexual or aromantic people are so often defined by what they don't have or what they don't do or what they don't want, or from this very just limited and restrictive perspective. And you prefer, and it makes all the sense in the world to me, to approach it from a more expansive perspective. Here's what we do have. Here's the range of feelings or emotions or relationships that we might have or can explore. And so I really appreciated that. And you were just getting to one of the next things I was going to ask, which was about some of the microaggressions that asexual or aromantic people face, including the you just haven't found the right one, or you just got to keep trying, don't give up on love, or maybe it's because of some sort of past trauma or really bad breakup. Now you think you're aromantic or you think you're asexual. What are some of those microaggressions that you've heard or come across?
Yeah. So, the you just haven't met the right person yet is really common. One of my favorite, as far as the obvious cognitive dissonance, is you've never had sex. Well, how could you know you're asexual? And then you've had sex. Well, then you can't be asexual.
So again, how do you can't win either way. You don't know yourself, apparently.
Mm-hmm. If we think about power structures, there's this concept of compulsory sexuality, the assumption that everybody wants and needs sex and is defined by some kind of sexual attraction. And this gets pushed in so many aspects of our society, and it also gets heavily gendered. So if you think about the ways we are supposed to perform sexuality or perform chastity based on what gender we are socialized in and other social factors, race, age, body shape, type, um, culture, ability, disability, whether or not we are allowed access to sexuality, whether we are allowed to be sexual, or whether or not we are believed if we say we are not interested in sexual activity. People who are hypersexualized in our society may not be believed if they say they are asexual. And people who are desexualized in our society may be told, well, that's just normal. Of course you don't want sex.
Of course, you don't want that. It's like the emphasis, like, of course, you don't want sex because, again, of all whatever beliefs or ideas that people have about you or whatever other identities you hold or groups you belong to, just like on the other side, of course, you want to have sex because that's how the world sees you or thinks of you. So that must be true.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying, there's a very big difference between placing a label on somebody and taking on a label yourself. And my favorite phrasing for that actually comes from Bisexual Baker on Tumblr, who says, quote, as any cat owner will be able to tell you, someone else putting you in a box is entirely different from getting into a box yourself.
Makes all the sense in the world. Yes, it's one thing. Yeah, this I'm telling you who I am versus you are telling me who I am, because why would you know better than I would?
Miranda Fricker, who's a British philosopher, talks about epistemic injustices of knowledge, and one of those is testimonial injustice. The fact that we devalue the lived experience and testimony of people because of our perception of them. So whether or not you believe somebody's identity and their experiences is influenced by how you perceive them.
We could have a whole hour conversation at least about just that. I'm like, so many examples are popping in my head. My goodness.
Yeah, well, don't let me be the only one talking. I want to hear what your thoughts are.
I'm like, oh, you're going to send me down a rabbit hole, because I'm thinking especially when it comes to things like sexuality or identity or any form of injustice or oppression. The first example, honestly, that popped in my head was with the rapper Megan Thee Stallion. when she got shot, there were all of these conversations about, no, she didn't get shot, or she should have been able to walk it off or brush it off, no big deal. And I think a lot of that comes from people's perception of her. She's a very confident woman. Like, her lyrics are very confident. She's tall. She's dark skinned. And I think it just made it really hard for people to see that she could also have been a victim of violence. And I think that happens to so many people or so many groups of people. It's like the world or society has decided that you're invincible, or that, nothing harms you, nothing hurts you, nothing touches you. And so that they deny your very real truth of, hey, I've been hurt, I've been harmed, I've been affected.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah.
100%.
I'm going to be sitting with that and chewing on that for a little while. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Can I give you one more term related to that?
Yes, please.
So in talking about epistemic injustice, and Miranda Fricker has a whole book on this, she talks about testimonial injustice as well as hermeneutical injustice. And hermeneutical injustice is an injustice of interpretation and access to knowledge. So whether or not we have the language and the knowledge base to interpret and understand our experiences through anything except those dominant narrative lenses, means whether or not we can understand our own experiences. My not even understanding asexuality until I was 39 was part of that hermeneutical injustice, because I didn't have access to the knowledge to help me have the language to understand my experiences, because there was very little asexual representation in media, very little asexual representation in scholarship, journalism, in all of the ways that we have of disseminating knowledge into our society.
Right.
So our experiences get erased, ignored, explained away in other ways, and interpreted through that dominant lens. So we never have access to interpret our own experiences through our own lens.
And I'm thinking about how just that feels connected to me to like internalized oppression, just because if you're not exposed to anything that helps you feel seen or heard or validated or represented, it's so easy to assume that the dominant narrative must be correct. What everyone else says or thinks must be true, because I don't know any different. I don't have any evidence to the contrary. And if what I was experiencing or thinking or feeling was real, quote unquote, I would be able to explain that or describe that. And because I can't, it must not be true. I'm thinking how culturally or societally we do that to other people, and how it can lead to internally oppressing ourselves. This is the type of stuff I like to nerd out about. So I'm like, hey, again, this could be a whole other hour conversation.
And you thought we'd be good with an hour.
My goodness. I'm like, wow, there is so much more. I'm definitely going to look into some of the names or some of the resources that you have mentioned, and I'll make sure that I include that for other folks to be able to kind of follow up on, because it's so fascinating to me. And this is also why I tell people in my work, I'm like, yes, I'm a sex therapist or I'm a sex educator. And there are some days that I don't talk about sex at all, because I'm talking about all these other things that affect sex and relationships. Wow. Are there other common confusions or misunderstandings or misrepresentations around asexuality or aromanticism that come to mind for you?
What I think is really important to understand is how nuanced it is, how broad the spectrum is. We've talked about it. It's still within very binary terms of people who experience versus people who don't experience, but we have that gray umbrella. We have all of the in-between spaces, and we have terminology and language that's come out of these communities to describe our relationships with the things people get confused about. Like, for example, whether or not you want to engage in sexual activity, because that becomes so much of the questions and confusion around asexuality. There's even language for that. Some people had the terminology of cupiosexual, meaning that they don't experience sexual attraction, but they do want to engage in a sexual relationship. Versus a poppysexual who does not experience sexual attraction, is repulsed by sexual activity, does not want to engage in sexual activity at all. there's so many different ways. There's also the concepts of having an interest in performing sexual acts on another versus not wanting to receive sexual acts. And the flip of that, being open to receiving sexual acts, but not wanting to perform them. And we have this concept of reciprocity that is infused in our talks about sexuality, that there's this assumption that it must be mutually satisfying, that it must be reciprocal, that, that holy grail of orgasms where they climax at the exact same time.
Yes.
And it's, yada, yada, which most of us in the sexuality field already know is very, very, very rare. But that's how it is in the movie.
I call it, that's one of the examples I use when I call it movie sex. All of the, we just can't get each other's clothes off fast enough. Everybody's just hot and ready to go. Everything's perfect. And it's a great time from beginning to end. Yeah.
Yeah. But what does it mean if, in general, you enjoy performing sexual acts for others, but you never want to receive them?
Yeah.
Or if you only enjoy receiving and you never want to perform it. Both of these things can get stigmatized, can get, a lot of assumptions placed on them. And there's other terminology that's come out of the queer community for some of these too. Like think of in lesbian communities, they have the term pillow princess for somebody who enjoys receiving but not reciprocating in that context. And what does reciprocation mean? Does it have to be in a sexual context? Like if what I enjoy doing for you is giving you a back massage and what you enjoy doing for me is eating me out, why is that a problem?
Who says that's not reciprocal? Who gets to decide?
Right?
Again, so a much more expansive and freeing lens or perspective of looking at sex in the relationships. And that's why I think that's another reason why I think conversations like this are so important, because I think of it as, even if you're not asexual or aromantic, there could still be principles that apply or that are still helpful for you. Like challenging, what does reciprocity mean? Challenging, what does love mean? What does relationship mean? Being able to ask those questions and push those boundaries or push back on the constraints that have been so limiting is something that I think we could all benefit from, regardless of how you identify.
And regardless of orientation, especially within clinical spaces, I'm constantly having to remind people, you don't need to rule out asexuality in order to make space for people to just not want sex. That needs to be an important part of that conversation. I was just watching a fantastic training by Martha Coppy, who I want to send everybody to now, because she was demonstrating through example how to have a desire discrepancy conversation with a couple sitting in front of you, starting with the lower desire partner and being explicitly clear, I will never pressure you into having sex, and having a conversation with that lower desire partner. What do you want? Where do you want to take this? And helping them to have space to say, I don't want sex. Well, the concept of, well, I want to have sex because my partner wants it. But what do you want?
But
what would make you happy? And making the partner sit there and just breathe for a minute before turning to them and affirming their feelings, their frustrations, their fears. And also having a very explicit conversation with them about ending the pressure for sex and helping that couple figure out where to go from there without ever bringing that pressure back into the relationship.
Yeah, that this has to be the end goal. At some point, we have to get to having sex or having sex more often. It's like, no, not necessarily. There is no rule that says that is where we have to end up. But instead of talking about where you should or where you're supposed to end up, where do you want to end up? Where do you want to take this? That's so helpful. What other recommendations do you have? I know you do a lot of work in training with clinicians and other professionals. What would you say is important for therapists, clinicians, other professionals to know about supporting folks on the spectrum of asexuality or aromantic?
Yeah, when I was talking about we're often defined by what we don't experience, how do we then focus on what we do want, what we do experience? So how do we find ways to center non-sexual, non-romantic forms of intimacy and pleasure? What do those words look like and feel like outside of a sexual or romantic context? And how can we help people to start to recognize all of the kinds of intimacy and pleasure that they do engage in their life, and that we don't have to rank these. We don't have to set sexual or romantic pleasure and relationships above all others. And we can really focus on what are the things, especially within a coupled relationship, question of what do you both find fulfilling? What gives you both that sense of enjoyment outside of a sexual context? What are you doing in your life when you're not having sex? Like, do you enjoy cooking together, hiking together? Like, sex is an activity.
Right.
What if hiking was how we were expected to primarily connect within a relationship? And what if you just don't like hiking?
I would be out of luck. Oh my gosh, let me tell you.
Exactly. We talk about that innate sexual attraction or romantic attraction that often drives those activities. But when you don't have that motivation either, you enjoy the activity because you enjoy the activity and you get other things out of it, or you find other activities that are just way more fulfilling. Like my partner and I both love back massages. And I would get a massage every single day if I could afford it. So I understand conceptually wanting sex every single day, because if that's, the thing that you prioritize is just really exciting for you. I get that, because I would love a back massage every day. But you know what? I don't get a massage every single day. And that has never been given the same kind of weight within relationships as the expectation of sex. There is no expectation of a back massage. I have to deal with the fact that I'm not going to get a back massage every day. Some people have to deal with the fact they're not going to get sex every day. Or they may have to focus on their own sexual pleasure. Like, I have tools that if I need a back massage,
there you go.
I have my little neck massager. And yeah, it's not the same as having another human do it, but also sometimes it's better at getting to where I need it to go.
I hope folks heard that. I hope you heard that, and you do with that information what you will.
I spent most of my career in the sex toy industry. So yeah, there are other options.
There are other options. And those other options can be great and wonderful. It doesn't mean that you're settling or that you're missing out or you're depriving yourself or anyone else or anything like that.
Take time to really enjoy a full-bodied, fully aroused, heightened sexual solo experience.
Yeah.
See where that can take you without society's shoulds and shouldn't placed upon the concept of solo sex.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. What about for the broader society? How could we all be a better ally, a better community member to asexual or aromantic people?
Yeah, I think the best advice I have is lean in, and if you're curious, lead with curiosity. What does that mean for you? How can I support you? And don't turn that curiosity into like interrogation. Like, just because somebody says they're asexual doesn't mean you have any right to ask them about their masturbation habit,
Right.
Or that will prove or disprove the validity of their identity, Make space for how much this awareness can clear the possibilities of sex and relationships, that asexuality and aromanticism are queer, because they completely change the paradigms around our expectations of orientation, relationship, and attraction.
In some really beautiful ways, if I might add. Yeah. What about for someone who is dating as an asexual or aromantic person, or interested in dating an asexual or aromantic person? Is there any advice or recommendations that you might have for them?
Cody Deigel-Orian wrote a book that just came out last year, the Ace and Aro Relationship Guide, that is a very nice peer-led support book for people that are just starting to figure some of those things out. So I think that's a good tool to go with. When it comes to dating, I actually found my spouse through OkCupid in 2008 because I had just gotten out of a relationship where I had fallen in love with somebody that was not a good match for me. And I knew that I didn't know what limerence was, but I knew that I could fall in love with somebody that wasn't a good match. So I wanted to make sure that I had somebody who was a good match before I let my heart at it, which is why I went to OkCupid. Now, unfortunately, when Tinder bought out OkCupid, they really destroyed the algorithm that had been so useful to me. But I did put on there that I had a low libido. I felt that was an important thing to put on in leading into finding somebody that might be compatible. Some people don't feel comfortable putting their asexuality in their profile, and that's up to you. I think that you don't owe people disclosure of anything about you. That's what dating is.
Right.
It's the getting
Right.
to know
So
you.
true.
And sometimes finding points where you have those conversations go, you know what? I actually think we're very compatible. Let's be friends.
Fair.
And leading with friendship. That is my best advice. If you are going to be dating, lead with friendship. Lead with looking for somebody that you can be friends with. And if you're looking for a spark or a connection, remember, some people are demisexual or demi-romantic, and they need to have an emotional bond with somebody before any of that even happens. So they may not have those initial feelings. And giving space and time to get to know somebody so that if the relationship doesn't go in a sexual romantic direction, that it doesn't mean you have to cut the person off completely. If you like them and you think you want this person in your life. So if you want to disclose, you will weed out a lot of people, which I think can be a good thing, because if you are very vulnerable to the emotional toll of rejection, it might be better to just weed people out ahead of time. It does mean you will get fewer matches. It is a marathon, not a sprint. Don't just be on there for a week and go, well, there's nobody here that interests me.
Yeah, right.
Which is why, date for friends can be really helpful, because you go through all that dating, even if you don't find a sexual or romantic partner, hopefully you've made some friends along the way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I know I've had or observed or seen conversations with folks who are like, I think I might be asexual, or I think I might be aromantic. I don't seem to have much interest in sex, but I don't how do I know for sure? Because of course then that means having to figure out, what does this mean for dating or relationships if that is something that folks are interested in. I've been asked this question so many times and I never feel like I give a good answer. So I'll ask you, how might someone get to know or confirm, so to speak, if they are asexual or aromantic?
Join community spaces. Get involved in asexual or aromantic community spaces, whether there's Facebook support groups, there's Discord groups, there's in-person you can find through meetup.com. There's the original asexuality.org forums, the AVEN, the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, which is the first organization that had broad-scale forums for people to start discussing this language as early as 2001. And the archives are still there. The forums are still active. Go have those conversations and see if what other people talk about resonates for you, if it feels like it aligns with your experiences. And if nothing else, you'll probably have the experience of being affirmed in whatever it is that drew you to even ask that question. Because regardless of orientation, again, it's nice to be in a space where people aren't telling you there's something wrong with you, or that you must want sex, or that you must want romantic love, or whatever that might be.
Yeah. I will definitely be borrowing that tidbit of advice. So thank you so much for that. Is there, you have shared so much already, so many gems, so many pieces or tidbits of wisdom. I'm so thankful. Is there anything else, any last thoughts or any key takeaways that you would want folks to walk away from this conversation or from this episode with?
Oh man, I think we've hit a lot of really important aspects. I'm not sure what else there might be, except, I would come back to that reminder that it's okay to not want sex. It's okay to not want romantic love, romantic relationships. And it's okay to want these things without feeling the same things that other people seem to feel.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that beautiful and always timely reminder. Aubri, this conversation was even more than I imagined it would be. I knew you had the skills and the experience and could talk about these things and break it down in a really easy way to understand. I knew that much just from the small amount of research that I did into you. Absolutely exceeded my expectations. And because I know that there will be folks wondering how to connect with you, how to work with you, what you have coming up, can you please share? Again, I'll put the link to your website and your Instagram for folks. But yeah, what do you have going on, or how can folks connect with you?
Definitely. Well, I encourage everyone to come to my website, asexualeducation.com, scroll to the bottom, join my monthly newsletter. It is just once a month. I'm not going to bombard you with a ton of emails. That keeps you updated on what's going on in my life, what my work is looking like, what I have upcoming. My next workshop, and I don't know exactly when this is going to air. So I do a monthly workshop that is open to the public, and it's on a pay what you can basis, suggested price range of $15 to $35, but literally pay what you can. And for clinicians, if you would like to do a deep dive into these orientations with me, I have a 6-hour 6 CE training that I do every few months on these orientations. And it is also on a sliding scale, and I try to make it accessible to anyone that will find that useful. It's not only for clinicians. So if you are, just looking for your own knowledge, you are more than welcome to attend that, but it is directed towards mental health professionals and sexuality professionals.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope that folks just flood your website. Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I also forgot to mention, I also do one-on-one consults, both with professionals and individuals. So if you just want to have a conversation like this and just ask your own questions and, give a case consult, or you're just trying to figure things out, I do one-on-one consults, also on a sliding scale. Pay what you can, whatever supportably within your budget. And I am more than happy to have you on my calendar. I don't sell packages. It's just kind of like, you want to have a conversation, book me on the calendar. We'll have a conversation. I'll send you a bunch of resources. And if you decide to have another conversation later, that's fine too. But I'm totally fine with a one-off conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really do hope that folks flood your website, get all these great and wonderful resources. I know I will be checking out some of these great and wonderful resources. Thank you for the incredible work that you do and for your commitment to making it accessible to people. That is also super important and super helpful. Again, we got to have access to the information about our experiences and our perspectives. So I get it. I see what you did there. So thank you, Aubri. I truly cannot thank you enough for just being here and joining the show. And I hope you all learned a lot. I'm sure you did. Absolutely remember to connect with Aubri. And until next time. Thank you for tuning in to From the Heartside Out, hosted by Cee The Sex Lady, produced by Christine Johnson of Pure Pod Vibes, and music by Rico the Artist. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something new, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform of choice. And don't forget to share with a friend so they can learn something too. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Please send any comments or questions to podcast@ceethesexlady.com. That's podcast@ceethesexlady.com. Until next time, keep loving, living, and leading from the heart side out.